Welcome to Faith and Family, a radio outreach of Family Life Center International. And now from Greenville, South Carolina, here's your host, Steve Wood.
Hello, this is Steve Wood, and thank you for joining me for this special message today entitled The 10 Secrets of Training Children for Mass. A lot of you want some help in this area. A lot of priests would like a lot of parents having some help in this area, but let me begin first by just sharing a word of encouragement to any parent listening. You know, just the fact that you are listening to this message and interested in learning how you could better train your children for Mass says a whole lot to me about you as a parent or as a grandparent trying to find resources for your grown children. Or if you're a priest, it says a lot about how you care for the parents of young children within your parish. And I want you to know that God is a partner with you in the training of your children to worship Him. We're not training our children to worship ourselves. We're training our children to worship God. And God desires the love, the adoration, and the worship of your children more than you would like to see them do that. So please recognize and be encouraged that He's a partner with you every step of the way. Now, I need to have a little bit of a disclaimer in that what I'm presenting in this message are not the 10 commandments of parenting and training children for Mass, and you don't need to fret over following my advice like it's the law. Instead, I'm just sharing some of the things that worked for my wife and me in raising our 8 children. Now, if I do say some things that challenge something that you are now doing, I would ask you to weigh what I say and not just discount it, because sometimes good parents react out of a sense of defensiveness. Oh, I don't want to do anything wrong to my children. I don't even want to think about I'm doing anything wrong. And it's not necessarily right and wrong. I just want to caution you that good parents can sometimes get uptight when even considering that they might be doing something that's not the best for their children. Therefore, I encourage you just to relax a bit while listening to what I have to say. Good parenting means that you are always open to learning and improving. I've said publicly many times what my mother once said to me. The problem with parenting is that by the time you are an expert, you're unemployed. I'm probably not an expert, but I am unemployed, so hopefully I'll have a few things to share with you in these 10 secrets of training children for Mass. And I want to let you in on a secret of my secrets. I think some of my very best secrets are simply different ways of conceptualizing and tackling the difficult parenting task of training your children for Mass. It's like viewing the same task, that's training your children for Mass, but viewing it through a different lens that might end up making all the difference in the world. Okay, let's go. Secret number 1, training children for Mass is a job for moms and dads. This is a really important one. You know, I've seen this in Mass, and you probably have too, and I hope that no one listening to this message it would apply to, but just in case. I'm thinking of the scene. You're sitting a few pews behind a nice young family, but you notice that the 2 or 3 children are more or less totally out of control. They're disrupting everyone seated around them. The poor mom is at the point of being frantic, trying to juggle 2 or 3 children that are seemingly out of control. Meanwhile, Dad's just sitting there, staring ahead, seemingly oblivious to the chaos going on right next to him, just almost totally neglecting the frantic pleas of his wife's eyes, just kind of glancing towards him, kind of like, help, and he just stares ahead. That's not the way it's supposed to be. Training children for anything is a team responsibility, mom and dad. Now, this might surprise you a little bit, but I don't think training children for Mass is an equal responsibility for moms and dads. In my estimation, at least 60% of the task and the responsibility for training children for Mass falls on dad's shoulders. That's right. If you look at St. Paul's letter to the Ephesians, in the context where he talks to families, to husbands and wives, for moms and dads, he says in chapter 6 and verse 4, "Fathers, do not provoke your children to anger," that's don't being harsh with them, "but bring them up in the discipline and instruction of the Lord." Now, I find it very interesting. St. Paul never mentions moms in that verse about bringing children up in the discipline and instruction of the Lord. Now, obviously, moms are involved, and moms are usually always involved, but that doesn't mean that only moms are involved, because it's a mom and dad's responsibility. And the Scripture, I think St. Paul very wisely focuses right in on dads, that they're critical for a task, just like the one we're talking about, training children for Mass. So how might this work? Well, in my experience, it's good. Dad takes the toddler and mom takes the new baby, and you kind of share those responsibilities. Obviously, the new baby, you just want to keep comforted and fed and dried, or maybe in a cry room or whatever. But when the child begins the sitting through Mass, participating in Mass, time to stand, time to kneel, time to pray, that's when dad is on active duty. He's not retired. He's on very active duty, and he's helping with that training. Now, I know there are probably some single moms listening to this message as well. And you're saying to yourselves, well, what in the world am I going to do? I want to give you a special word of encouragement, because the Bible says in Psalm 68 that God himself is Father of the fatherless and protector of widows. That is God in his holy habitation. And I'm not saying the job is going to be easy, but God is with you in a special way. If you have a special need, or maybe you're a mom and your husband's on a military deployment, or perhaps on a police force or something like that, and can't be with you regularly at a certain stage of life when you have these children training for Mass, God is with you and can help you make up the difference, because there's one thing more difficult than single parenting and training your children for Mass, and that's zero parenting. And let me give you a real-life experience. Most of you know, in my past, before I became a Catholic, I was a Protestant minister. In fact, I was a church planter, which means I started a brand new Protestant congregation. And in our brand new little congregation, we started off, my wife Karen was the pianist for the congregation. I was the minister, led the scripture readings and some of the hymn singing and such like that. Well, I had two very young children, and we were saying to ourselves, what are we going to do? Because, Karen's at the piano, I'm at the pulpit, and we have two little ones by themselves. To make matters worse, I'm not going to mention which one because I'll get in big trouble, but one of my older two children I affectionately called my Mexican jumping bean. She just didn't seem to sit still very well in very, very many places, and just basically had to ask God to give them the grace to be able to sit by themselves while at least the first part of the service, when both mom and dad were up front, apart from them. And you know what? It worked pretty well. So if you're a single mom, be encouraged. If you're a mom and a dad, you're front and center. You're a key player in this process. And that's secret number one. The training of children for Mass is a job for both moms and dads. All right, secret number two. And I dare say this is the biggest secret, okay? And the biggest secret has to do with the best and the worst place to train your children for Mass. Now, this is going to maybe shock you a little bit, but the worst, at least primary place to train your children for Mass is Mass. You heard me right. Thinking that training your children for Mass, and this is where your lens has to go to wide angle, not that very narrow angle shot where you don't see the peripheries. If you think training your children for Mass is a 60-minute-a-week affair, then you're missing so much. In fact, you're missing the entire rest of the week. And here are two sentences you need to keep in mind. It's nearly impossible to train your children just for Mass during Mass. And I'll explain that a little bit more in a second. It's fully possible to train your children for all of life, including Mass. And here's the reason why. Your children will bring to Mass the behavior they're getting away with all week long. And so the secret is to train your children all week long and not just 60 minutes per week. And you might say, well, no, that's too big a job. No, by training your children for Mass all week long, you're also training your children for life. You're really accomplishing two critically important tasks in raising children. You'll be training them for life, you'll be training them for Mass, and you'll be training them for who knows whatever else, all other types of things in life. So really, your home prayer time is a prime time for training your children in Mass. Going to the grocery store is a great time to train your children for Mass, and I'll be giving you some examples. Going to restaurants, family meal times, car trips, all of these are opportunities to train for both life and worshiping God during the Mass. And again, just remember, it's what your children are, how they're behaving all week long is how they're behaving in Mass. And expecting them to act categorically different during Mass than they do the rest of the week is an unrealistic expectation. So, for instance, in the grocery store, you need a certain amount of patience because they put candy and sugar cereal right at the kitty eye level to basically encourage your children to immediate gratification, getting what they want, and whining, complaining, and begging, and a lot of types of behavior you would like to see restrained, that you would like a measure of self-control. One of the things that I would do, first of all, let me just back up a moment. I actually, when our second child was born, our daughter, I never expected to go to the grocery store again for at least 10 or 12 years. I just thought this would be impossible. But I later found out that I could actually go to the grocery store with 8 children and survive the whole event. One of the things, I would approach it as a coach. I would take just a real quick pause before we would go into that grocery store and say, when we go in, I expect this type of behavior, and just explain basically what I would like. I don't want a lot of whining and this type of thing. And if you succeed during this short grocery trip, wouldn't take any longer than what I needed to, our particular grocery store would give a cookie to children. And I would say, that's your reward. And there was probably, I can't think of too many times, because I would have been arrested for child abuse, I would say, no cookie, because we didn't make it. We didn't achieve our time. And here, a quick grocery trip, a child gets used to certain expectation of behavior, doing so, restraining some impulses internally, and then having a successful reward, and everybody's happy and munching on their cookie. One of the same things I would do in a restaurant. Now, those of you who don't like to give any sugar to your children aren't going to like me, but you figure out something else. This is what I did, and I personally felt it was more important to train for Mass than worrying about sugar on occasion. Any case, I had a favorite restaurant that had one of those soft ice cream machines with a little dish of sprinkles on the side. And it was the same thing. We have a level of expectation for behavior during our restaurant visit. And if you met, very basic level of expectations for a child, then you hit the soft ice cream machine with sprinkles. If you didn't, that machine was not available to you. And it really, really doesn't take too many trips. In fact, in many instances, just so they know that you mean what you say what you mean. If you have several children, this actually gets easier because the older ones will tell the younger ones that, hey, listen to dad, listen to mom. They really mean what they say, and you'll find some decent behavior taught all week long. Now, you could say, I can teach this in Mass, and you can, but I'm just going to speak personally. When my kids would start squirming or some type of negative behavior during Mass, I would get embarrassed because there's people all around and everyone's quiet, important things going on. And then if there's some kind of misbehavior or noise going on, it's distracting other people. And really, you feel terrible. And you either want to overlook it, just let them be quiet, and that's not really training. And it's, to me, in a supermarket or a restaurant or a home meal or something like that, it's so much easier, so much less stress as a parent to do the training at those times. Now, one of my favorite times for training for Mass was when our children were little. We'd have a special family prayer time, and for that time, we would sit. And part of the reason for sitting rather than kneeling or standing was that we would be sitting during Mass, and basically a prayer time at home is a short time of worshiping God, and it's the home parallel to what goes on in church. And so I thought, well, home prayer time would be a good time to do this, and don't try to be overly pious if you have young children. Keep it short. A brief family prayer time is exceedingly valuable, and children, particularly when it's bedtime, you don't want to stretch it out a long time. So we'd have a 3 to 5 minute prayer time. And the child who was kind of at the training for Mass stage, the particular one that needed some training, I would let sit on my leg and during the prayer time. And generally, I can think of one child, no names, who really didn't like that, both at home and in Mass. So one of the things I would do would be hold that child as basically our prayer time. We couldn't hear each other because she was making quite a racket. I hope God could hear what we were praying because we couldn't, and it was very disruptive. But again, would you rather be disrupted in your family room amongst your family members or have the same disruption with a few hundred or maybe 1,000 people in Mass? I greatly prefer the family room. And it didn't last too long because really what happened, it took maybe, I forgot exactly how long, to tell you the truth, but I can remember at first there was a lot of yelling, like, I don't want to be held, and they would squirm, and they wouldn't be able to get out of with their squirming, and so they would scream, and then all of a sudden, brief family prayer time was over, let down, and they would kind of like look around like, what am I screaming about? That wasn't too bad, and eventually they would just quit screaming. And I'd have a particular hold. A lot of people, for whatever reason, like to hear about my hold, but I would put the child on my leg. And let's imagine the child is sitting. I'm going to try to paint this in words for you. But imagine the child is sitting on my left leg, okay? And the child is a mini sumo wrestler. They basically know how to squirm when they don't want to sit still. I would put my right hand over their right leg or both legs. No, I guess their right leg, and grasp my leg, not theirs. But basically, they were pinned, and if they squirmed, I could just hold my leg firm. I'm not squeezing or hurting the child. And then I would take my arm, put it across their chest, and take my left arm, that is, put it across their chest and hold my right arm, my upper right arm, and grasp it. If they really started to squirm, I just squeezed my leg and squeezed my arm. They weren't going anywhere. And what I was trying to do, not hurting the child at any time, but there are certain times that you're going to be held, and it's not going to be that bad or not long. It's not going to hurt you in any way, but there's going to be sometimes you don't feel like sitting, that you're going to be asked to sit, and they can get used to doing so. Now, you might not like that, and again, I'm just presenting this, and you might say, boy, that's not for me. Fine. I'm just sharing you my wisdom, but I'll tell you the benefits of this. I don't know exactly what my dad did when I was little, but I think I got to the point that I was much younger than most kids my age. I could travel with him. He took me into business sales meetings, and he took me into a lot of situations with adults. I mean, I was the only kid in sight, and I could basically sit there with the men and different things, and I really enjoyed doing that. And I found that training my children for mass at home in little 3-4 minute segments, my children then could enjoy the benefits of traveling with me, going on airplanes, going to conferences. A lot of places most kids don't go, they could enjoy. And so think of it as you're just not training for mass, you're training for life. And yes, they have to get over the little bit of a hump of sitting when they don't feel like sitting, but kind of getting over that. And once they do, they can have the enjoyment of so much more of life rather than just having to shuttle them to kids-only activities. And I don't know, at least when I was a boy, I loved going to activities of the men, of the grown-ups, and being included in that, and it was a great delight. And your kids can do that too. So the big secret is that the best and the worst place to train your child for mass? Well, the worst primary place, and again, I'm sharing my view of this, is during mass itself. The best place is everything else during the week. Use the entire week, home, store, restaurants, meal times, whatever, to train for mass. Okay, that's number 2. Now we're rolling into number 3. Number 3 is another big secret. And the big secret is, Mom and Dad, the scope of your job is much bigger than training for mass. And this is just like number 2. This is where you need to widen the focus of exactly what you are doing here. And the big job in training your children for mass is this. It's taming the will to do what it doesn't want to do when it doesn't want to do it. Okay? The will comes in every one of us, thanks to Adam and Eve way back when, with a very self-centered focus. And your angelic newborn probably surprised you at about 12, 14, 18 months with things called tantrums and whatever. It's just when their will meets resistance. The universe, believe it or not, that nice little boy or girl, the universe revolves around. And the child is going to learn that there are times where their will doesn't want to do something at a particular time, and they have to be taught that those in rightful authority can ask them to do something they don't feel or will to do, and they need to do it. Now, this is a big task, and I would say this is an essential task, not just for training children for mass, but training children for life, and let me add another one, training children for eternal life, and I'll be getting to exactly what I mean by that. But how do you get there? How do you train the will in this way? Well, I would say part of the essential steps in this would be to eliminate certain negotiations with your child. You're about, say, your dad, and you're about to change your child's diaper, and they go, "No, I want mommy to do it," Well, granted, mom might do a better job, but any dad who's willing to change a diaper, do it. This isn't time for negotiations. Plus, you're very exposed at that point to discipline. So I would suggest that you and your wife determine there are some things you don't negotiate over. And if somebody is performing a necessary act for the child, like giving a bath, changing a diaper, or feeding, or something like that, again, you as parents determine what those things are. I wouldn't negotiate, and I wouldn't put up with negotiations. Or you can say, it's bedtime, and they go, I'm not ready yet. Well, maybe they aren't ready, but it is bedtime. Now, again, you determine, you don't want to do this all day long and become obsessive about this. Pick a few essential things where children frequently want to negotiate their will versus your will, and you don't negotiate. Okay? This isn't a conference table. This isn't a contract. This isn't a Middle East peace negotiation. This is a parent saying, I ask you to do this now, and you're not negotiating over it. Oh, say it's time for dinner, and they say in the middle of playing with their toys, I'm busy. Well, maybe they are busy, but they need to learn to respect the request of their parents for something that their parents have taught them. They expect obedience to their request, okay? And there's, again, this is where mom and dad need to have a kind of like a powwow. You don't want to do this about everything in family life and home life and everything, but pick some things where you're not negotiating apart from Mass, where you're teaching the child that there are certain times and places where they don't will to do what you're asking them to do, and you insist on a regular, consistent basis and back it up that they do what you ask. And, this involves a real Copernican revolution in a sense that it's changing the center of universe for your child's heart and mind. And you as a parent are fully capable of doing this by the time your child's 36 to 48 months old. And by doing it, you're not just setting them up for a life of respect for proper authority, rightful authority, but you're also setting them up for eternal life. Now, I'm not saying if you do this, your child is predestined for heaven, but I am saying that every human being has to learn that my will be done is not the path to heaven. And you can try that during the teen years when the will is really asserting itself, or maybe hope and pray for something in young adult years or something. Or you can do it in the early months of life when the will begins to assert itself, probably about a 2-year period. You can have this lesson learned. I'm not saying it's not going to be, residual problems, but you can have the basic lesson learned. Now, in saying what I just said, I think it's very important that you do give your child the opportunity for many choices. You don't want to make all the choices for your child, because that's going overboard. And the difficulty in giving any advice for parenting is kind of like a seesaw. You got to remain in balance. So, if your daughter wants to wear a pink dress versus a yellow dress or something like that, say, sure, honey. I mean, unless for some reason that's the big non-negotiable, but, color of shoes or which handbag or which toy they're going to take with them on a trip. Let them make decisions and set them up for making their own decisions. But there is that lesson, and it's a hard lesson, that they're going to need to do things when those in rightful authority ask them. And in fact, this is a primary goal of child training and discipline, not just training for Mass, but all of child training and discipline. And that is, you want to produce a growth. It doesn't happen instantaneously, but produce a growth towards a God-centered way of life. And it begins when the child is progressively disciplined, educated, corrected, and instructed so that he or she moves from a self-centered orientation towards a God-centered orientation. And when they do that, moral and ethical behavior is an outgrowth of this God-centered way of life. It's like St. Augustine said, there's two cities. One city is in love with self, and that's my will be done. And there's the city of God, thy will be done. And parents, you're the key to help your child get on that road, that Emmaus road from the city of self to the city of God. So here's advice from Pope Pius XII, who met with young married couples. And this is found in a book, Dear Newlyweds, published his addresses to young Italian couples who had just been married, and he would gather them together and give them advice for their family. And here's what he said. Take care, finally, not to wait until your children are grown up before exerting your authority over them, carefully and calmly, but at the same time, firmly and frankly, not giving in to any display of tears or temper. From the very earliest days, from the cradle, from the first glimmer of reason, see to it that they experience the touch of a loving and gentle, but wise, prudent, vigilant, and energetic hand. That's from page 186 in the book, Dear Newlyweds, Advice to Young Parents from Pope Pius XII. Now, he did follow saying, if at any moment you do not feel that you are altogether in control of yourselves, okay? Because if your child is not possessing self-control, disciplining them while you're lacking self-control is just going to make the whole situation worse. So he said then postpone till later time that basically you are under control. Always discipline when you are not controlled by anger. All right? And you need to do this. And by the way, just in case you are living under the illusion that only a boy can be strong-willed, girls can be strong-willed too. I'm a father of 6 girls, and girls come with all types of temperaments. Some very cooperative and docile, and some stronger-willed. And if you have a stronger-willed child, daughter or son, rejoice. Because if you train them properly and get them on the road that I'm talking about, they'll have the unusual courage to stand up to the peer group for what's right when they're in their teen years. So strong-willed girls and boys are great. They just need to be trained such. All right, that's secret number 3, okay? That taming the will is part of training for Mass, training for life, training for eternal life. Okay, now the others are going to be a little easier and a little quicker. Step or secret number 4, electronic babysitting and training for Mass. I have read recently that tablet babysitting is the new rage, and I'd like to share with you the best iPad apps for 3-year-olds. Did you get all that? I personally think tablet babysitting is an exceedingly bad idea. I own an iPad. I personally think for deeper, in-depth reading, iPads are better than iPhones and looking at a screen, so I'm not against iPads at all. I don't think they're great things for 3-year-olds. And most parents in my generation knew that if you exposed your children to too much TV, they had shortened attention spans. And what makes iPads exceedingly good babysitters, that's why tablet babysitting is the new rage, is that they are tremendous at grabbing a toddler's attention. They are tremendous at averting a toddler's attention off of, say, a conflict of the will and just grabbing their attention to something else. Yet, I promise you that the iPad babysitting will also work very well in creating attention deficit disorder in mass and in their life, okay? They do grab their attention, but part of your training is teaching them to be patient and going along with life at life's rhythm and not giving them a high, and these are high-octane diversions to keep them from learning how to properly behave. I think you're missing all kinds of opportunities. And if you're iPad babysitting during the week, I personally don't see how you're going to make it during Mass without doing the same thing. And that's generally, I haven't seen it in Mass yet, but every time you're tablet babysitting, you're missing an opportunity to train for Mass. Because unless you really have to, TV babysitting and tablet babysitting are really shortening attention spans. And Mass is a long time for a child. An hour is a long time for a child. And if you are taking what for a child is very naturally a short attention span and shortening it further, you're not training your children for Mass. Now, I told you at the beginning, some of the things I say might challenge you a little bit, and rather than getting defensive, because if you might be tablet babysitting, hear what I say. And I'm not saying you can't let your child watch any TV or or any tablet babysitting, but be cautious. I think you're better off training your child to make it through the grocery store 20 minutes without tablet babysitting. In other words, diverting their attention that way. Getting them, not comparing training children to training dogs, but when you're training a dog, like if you're training a dog for a blind person and somebody's in a store, you think they're just walking through and they say, oh, please don't pet the dog. He's working. The dog is working. The dog realizes he's being trained to work, that he's a certain level of attention, a certain level of behavior, and he's not just wandering through the store. And you can basically turn your child off by just diverting their minds to some type of cartoon or puzzle or whatever YouTube type thing on a tablet, or you can have them focus on learning behavior, maybe through a 20-minute trip, that will work them towards being able to sit through Mass for 60 minutes and participate. Just an example. Again, not to go overboard, I'm not saying take the shotgun to the TV or to the tablet, but let's just say you're on a trip. Well, trips are exceedingly long for children. Are you going to use your trip as an opportunity to train for Mass or to basically make it more difficult for your children to last to the 60 minutes of Mass? One thing I would suggest that we finally had a van back in the days of the videotapes, but, when we would reach the point of no return, that was usually either late afternoon or after dinner, want to get a couple more miles in, a couple more hours of travel in, we put on Sound of Music, and that was good for a couple hours of driving. But I wouldn't recommend putting it on all day long with a huge stack of DVDs to get them through a trip. That is not really training for life or training for Mass. And, there's a lot of things when you get to the end of a trip that you can take your children to a conference where children generally don't go. I've taken my children when they're very young to adult conferences, and they love traveling. But, I couldn't babysit them, so to speak, when I'm up in front and speaking to a few hundred people. So the training, apart from the media, gets them used to participating in things without having the high-octane visual stimulation. So secret 4, electronic babysitting is not conducive to training for Mass. I'm not saying never let your child use a tablet, never let your child watch TV. Extreme, moderate use, and don't let it become a crutch. It is not training. Okay, step or secret number 5. Delayed gratification trains children for Mass. Instant gratification creates spoiled children and does not train them for Mass. Okay, what you're looking for is patience and self-control. And this is very much Secret 5 is very much the cousin of Secret 4 because I just mentioned Secret 4. I think this is the primary way that young contemporary parents are falling into the instant gratification method of trying to almost pacify children rather than train children. The delayed gratification in anything is going to help them for all of life. In fact, if you read the best document in the universe on teaching sexuality to children, it's called The Truth and Meaning of Human Sexuality, published by the Pontifical Council for the Family. It speaks that children who have had instant gratification and given too much material goods inclines teens towards unchastity. In other words, if you don't teach them self-control, instead teach them instant gratification when they're younger, how are they going to have self-control as a teenager when it's really, really tough and have those struggles for self-control? So patience and self-control are taught by children. And one of the wisest things that I have seen, I would actually like to see some American parents do this. I did an earlier show on this about French children. There was an American whose husband was working in France for a year or two and noticed that French children were much, much better behaved in restaurants than American children. They had the self-control, they had the patience. And one of the main ways that the French parents teach delayed gratification is that they have regular meal times without snacking in between, with the exception of one afternoon snack. And the interesting thing is that, say, if a French mom would go into the market and buy some real tasty snack in the morning, that snack would not be consumed until the afternoon in regular snack time. So there could be, 4-5 hours of delayed gratification for having that snack. You think, oh, that's cruel, cold parenting. Is it? I think it's cruel parenting when children start screaming, whining, complaining, and throwing a tantrum when they can't have a snack and consume it right then and there in the supermarket aisle. I think that's the cold, cruel parenting, personally. And the French are giving their kids treats. They're being nice about it. It's just that the way we do it is that we wait until the time. And then the time, we have our treat. Again, you can take it or leave it, but I dare say that teaching a delayed gratification versus instant gratification by having a regular treat time during the day might be an overlooked resource for all parents to train for mass. Okay, that was secret number 5. Delayed gratification trains children for mass. Number 6, secret number 6, rewards. And rewards are helpful. I've mentioned ice cream and sprinkles, donuts, afternoon treat times. They're fine. I just wouldn't recommend seeing your reward as the primary role in training children for mass. Because, if your child is good in mass, you give them a reward. I'm not talking about your children here. I'm talking about you. Because if that you see as the primary tool, so to speak, for training children for mass, you've taken your perspective and narrowed it again, seeing that training for mass is a 60-minute-a-week affair versus an all-week affair. So yes, rewards are helpful, but they're not your primary. I've got to tell you a story about one of my daughters. We, at this point in our family, didn't have ice cream during the week. It was a Sunday treat, particularly for those who were good in mass. So anyhow, my daughter is sitting there piously praying, so to speak, and she turns to my wife right during the middle of the service and says, do I get ice cream after Mass? Well, her mind necessarily wasn't on prayer, but her heart was in the right place, okay? So rewards are great. Just remember, we want to broaden this out to an all-week affair. Okay, rewards, helpful, not primary. That was secret number 6. Secret number 7, I'm kind of amazed that most kind of miss this, or many miss this. Secret number 7 is choose opportunities for success. In other words, you're looking to find an opportunity that will be best for your child, not for you, for your child to have success. So in choosing a restaurant when your children are little, it might not be your favorite restaurant where they have multiple courses and it's an hour and 45-minute affair. If you have very young children, you're probably going to have discipline problems by the end of the meal. Rather than choosing a restaurant where maybe the first course can kind of come in a prompt manner, might really help make for a successful opportunity during a restaurant visit. You're taking your child on an airplane flight for the first time. Now it might mean wherever you're going, it's just difficult to get there. There's no economical tickets available, but you might want to think about choosing a flight and time of day and such like that would, and the connections that would be best for your child. So those first couple of experiences are positive ones. And so then when they approach the 3rd, 4th, and 5th flight or the 3rd, 4th, and 5th visit to the restaurant, they associate success, something enjoyable, something that works, and there's a certain momentum towards success that builds on previous successes. The same thing when you're choosing which Mass to go to, particularly when you're in those crunch years where you're really doing the training. You want to pick a time for Mass that's offered in your area that might be best for your children. Again, not best necessarily for your sleep cycle, but for theirs, okay? So that was secret 7, choose opportunities for success. Secret 8, don't start what you later need to stop. Now, I believe in energetic parenting, committed parenting, but personally, I don't want to do any more work than I have to do. I'm not lazy, but I just don't want to have to have headaches that I don't need. And here's what I mean. If you start something, then that later you need to kind of go through a weaning period with, that you really don't need to start in the first place, why do it? Now, I realize that a lot of people can't conceive of taking young children to Mass without Cheerios. Okay, so you start a behavior, and yeah, in the short run, it's kind of helpful, but how many months or how many years are they going to need something to chew on during Mass? Oh, they might outgrow Cheerios. Are they going to need candy and gum? Is that appropriate? Well, I dare say if you're listening to this message, you would probably say, no, that's not appropriate for Mass, even though some people do it, even adults. So you don't want that. You would have to wean that. Do you want to wean somebody pre-adolescent or child in grade school, or you just basically say, I'm not going to start Cheerios, candy, and gum during Mass? Here's another one. How many times have you seen, 101 Dalmatians books in Mass or similar books? I have nothing against 101 Dalmatians. I love dogs. But is Mass a time for reading books and distracting other things? What about texting as a teen, or even, if they have a smartphone with texting, you want them to do that, Matt? No, that's not appropriate. Well, why start something that's not appropriate? Reading, communicating, eating. I think the children's missal is a good idea because they start with that. Now, they'll move to the regular missal, but it won't be a real radical change of behavior. There's a continuity there. In fact, one of my radio guests, I won't mention his name, but he had a great radio show with me on tackling problems with teenagers. And I happened to sit behind him on a feast day and watch his young children. And his son was just up there and wanted to be just like Dad. And he was holding his missile just like all the adults do. And I just couldn't help but laughing to myself. You know, he was holding it upside down, but he had the right behavior. So he had no major adjustments in the future. All he had to do is figure out is to get the missile right side up. But you see, he was going and initiating behavior that wouldn't need any major changes, and basically that's secret number 8. Secret number 9, we're getting towards the end here, and again, I'm just sharing my heart with you, not trying to stir up a bunch of controversy, and I'm including priests who are listening to me, but I would suggest avoiding most children's masses. I do not think that they are the best opportunity to train children for Mass. In fact, when I say most children's Masses, there are exceptions. I mean, there's exceptions right here in Greenville for the family Mass. But when the Mass is, they basically style the liturgy and such to make it very user-friendly, I don't think that's necessarily child-friendly. If you want something child-friendly, a Mass with transcendence, you want to capture a child's imaginations. You want reverence. You want sovereign majesty, radiating the greatness of God. That's what you want for a child. You don't want it kind of dumbed down balloons and diddly singing. You want great music, beautiful architecture, a priest who's careful in his mannerisms, and parents, your behavior, your dress, your deportment, just how you carry yourself. These are, you send out like 100 signals, and so does the architecture and the music and the liturgy, 100 signals to a young child. I take that back, 1,000 signals in 60 minutes. Did you know that much of the real presence of Christ in the Blessed Eucharist can be taught before a child's understanding develops? And I'm not saying to be able to articulate transubstantiation or anything, but something extremely special that's unlike anything else all week long. You can capture that child's imagination. And that's why I say the Mass that is uplifting to the glory of God and the transcendence. You don't want to bring God down. You want to lift up the heart of your child to God, and that's something that will stay with them all their life. Now, there is one thing. This is just a personal opinion. I do think a children's sermon is helpful, and this is going to pop the bubble of many preachers' homiletic expectations, but the vast majority of people cannot remember anything a priest or a Protestant preacher says 15 minutes after the Mass or the service is over. In fact, the majority of people will not be able to recall what was said in the homily by the time they hit the door of the sanctuary. But they can recall a day or two later what was said in a children's sermon. And the reason is a children's sermon has one memorable point. And preaching of any style that has one memorable point, including a children's sermon, is best for kids and adults. They'll both remember it. And so basically, I think that's a great idea, that have a brief time for a children's sermon. That will be the one that's remembered. But in any case, the main point of secret number 9 is avoiding children's masses, most of them. There are some exceedingly reverent and uplifting, and even children's choirs that do such a beautiful job, but you want the reverence, the glory of God, the transcendence of God to capture your child's imagination. Don't lose sight of that. You don't want to dumb down God, so to speak, liturgy and architecture for a child. You want to lift them up, and don't underestimate a child. Okay, and secret number 10, you can take or leave, by the way. For some people aren't going to maybe enjoy hearing this, but it's. I'll just say this is your bonus secret. Take it or leave it. But I would be very cautious about encouraging life teen masses. And this is for the exact same reason as secret number 9 for children. If you look at the statistics of what happens after the high school years, it is very bleak. Both the Gallup organization and the Barna organization do religious polling, surveys, and Barna found that 61% of today's young adults had been churched, active in church life at one point during their teen years, but now that they are older, in their 20s, they are spiritually disengaged. They said further, only 1/5 of 20-somethings, that's 20%, have maintained a level of spirituality consistent with their high school experiences. And basically, Gallup said that the challenge for the decade ahead is translating the religious excitement, enthusiasm of the early teen years into a maturing faith for 17 to 25-year-olds. Now, here's my point. If you have like a children's mass, so you try to kind of jazz things up, so to speak, for children rather than lifting them up, okay, then they're going to need something in their teen years, or they're going to say Mass is boring. And so you have to make it even jazzier during the teen years. And yet, even the jazzy teen masses kind of lose their zip, so to speak, by the time you're 20s. Now, the 20-something age frames are the most difficult years for a person in the entire lifespan in remaining faithful to Christ and His church. And so what you're then doing by not introducing them from their earliest years what they're going to stay with all their life, but hoping they're going to do it during the most difficult times in their life, results in only 1/5 of 20-somethings having the same faith commitment, and this is Protestant and Catholic, that they had during their teen years. Now, my suggestion comes straight from Proverbs 22:6. It says, "Train up a child in the way he should go, and when he is old, he will not depart from it." In other words, start what you want your children to do when they're 20, and you don't have to keep your fingers crossed because it'll become a part of their life. Train up a child in the way he should go, and when he is old, he will not depart from it. I again encourage you, parents, be sure to listen to this a few times. Go through all 10 secrets. Find out which one maybe you want to really start concentrating on. Also, if you're a wife listening to this, be sure to pass along a CD to your husband, because he's the 60 in the 60-40 sharing in the task of training children for Mass.
Faith and Family is a radio outreach of Family Life Center International. Visit us online at familylifecenter.net. To order a CD copy of today's broadcast, order online at www.familylifecenter.net.